media very extensively. Dr. Widerman, did I say it right? Did we lose you?
No,
yeah, Weatherhead, not Dr.
But I get it all, so don't worry about it.
Dr. Widerhead and Ann Capis, who will be leading the discussion today. We are all really excited to hear from you. We think social media is beginning to play increasing role in the way we communicate in science, and I think this group is really all ears. So I'll turn it over to you. Mm-hmm.
Great. So I'm going to steal and share the screen. So just bear with me 1 second. And we're going to... Can everybody see our presentation, the do's and don'ts of science Twitter? Perfect. Yes,
okay. We do see, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. With COVID, you'd think that, you know, we'd all know how to do it by now, but I still panic. Well, great. So thank you so much again for having us. Just to kind of give you all a bit of my background, I have been the social media manager for Baylor College of Medicine since November of 2017. So this is my 5th year at Baylor. Before that, I was working at an advertising agency in Houston with clients from restaurants, building companies, and actually a lot of urgent care and private doctor practices. So kind of have that background of social media. So I guess I've really been in it since 2012. So the last 10 years. So we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about my suggestions for y'all, being specifically on Twitter, some things I've seen, some tips and tricks that I have to keep in mind. And then Dr. Weatherhead is going to kind of talk about her experience on social, kind of like a case study. So what should be on your professional profile? This is one of our doctors, Dr. McDivitt, and I kind of broke everything down. So starting off, I believe you should have your full name and at least a title on your profile. I also recommend having a professional handle. So as much as I love Harry Potter, I'm not going to have my handle be Harry Potter loves Ginny forever if it's something I'm going to be using to kind of promote and network. I still think that if you want to post about how much you love a topic, whether it's fanfic or your pets or something like that, I definitely think you can include it in your post, but just your handle, I recommend having something a little bit more professional. Here, I recognize having, you know, your full name, depending on how many characters it is, maybe a first initial, last name, that kind of thing. I also recommend having a professional headshot. So that doesn't mean that you have to go out and pay somebody to take a headshot. It could be a friend who just takes a nice one with a beautiful, clean background behind you. Or if your institution, you know, has photos that are put up on websites or things like that, totally use that. I also recommend putting up a cover photo or a header photo. The reason I do this is because, one, it makes your profile seem more filled out. 2, it's a great way to showcase maybe something you're interested in. So this Dr. McDivitt has, when we had all of our rankings for the last year for best hospitals, I've seen other people do vacation photos. I think something like that, or maybe something of your research that you find interesting. Family photos, it's kind of up to you, but having something up there is important. I also think that you should have a full bio. It can be short, sweet, kind of like this. We do at Baylor recommend putting something in their bio, in our faculty or students or staff's bio, if they do say that they work at Baylor, having something like, these views are mine, my views don't reflect the institution, something like that. Also, if you are practicing, not just doing research, I highly recommend putting something that you don't give medical advice. If you don't have social media, or maybe you don't have what you do on your social media, it's more personal, you would be shocked by the amount of people that ask for medical advice over social media. 2, I also recommend having your location where you are and your website. This can be something as simple as linking to your staff, your faculty bio on a website, your LinkedIn page. Maybe you have your own personal website where you have some of your work on, anything like that. But I do recommend the more filled out your profile is, the more real it looks, if that makes any sense. And also it gives more credibility to what you're saying. I get this question a lot from our faculty. So what should I post about? Well, you know, the answer is kind of endless. You can do something, especially when you're keeping it more professional, articles and papers by you, your friends, faculty at other institutions, maybe something you found that's not even in your specialty, but something you just found super interesting. Share it. I do have an asterisk there. Please make sure that the article has been published before you post about it. We've had some issues in the past where people have been really excited about their research and posted about it, but the journal article hadn't been published yet, or it had been placed on embargo, and they ran the risk of publication. So just make sure it is published. They've clicked the publish button. It is up on the website officially or in the journal, printed before you share about it. You can tease it and say, oh, something exciting is really coming, but do not link to it. Do not share it until it is officially published. I also like to suggest giving a look into your day-to-day. That can be something as simple as saying, I got up and here I went on a really cool run. Here's where I ran through today, or I love going to this coffee shop to grab coffee before I head into the lab, check it out, or before I head into clinic. Maybe you have a group that gets together of mentees. Maybe y'all all get together. You do a Zoom get together, taking a photo of that and sharing it. I think those kind of add a little bit of humanity to people's profiles. And, it's something interesting that somebody's like, oh, I never thought of that. Like, I would love to learn more about XYZ. This is kind of a given, but behind the scenes of conferences and events, especially now that conferences have started back up, I know a lot of you have seen that conferences will have the hashtag that they want people to use to kind of tap in to that conversation. It's a great way to meet people, whether you're at the conference or if you can't make it that year, you're having to watch online, you can still participate in a lot of the conversations. Twitter chats, it'll be interesting to see what Elon Musk kind of does with these, but they're a great resource. We recommend our faculty to do it. Usually people like Nature or the Houston Chronicle, something like that, will hold a Twitter discussion with experts, asking them a couple questions. And it'll be something like question 1, what should people know about RSV? And it's cool because you're getting to give your opinions while working with other experts in your field, and you can kind of see and work off each other. And it's neat because it's a way to kind of reach a new audience that you might normally not reach. Another thing, calling for research participants. If you're doing any research, social media is a great way. If you're looking for a diverse grouping, I will say, hence why we have the double asterisks, just make sure that you have IRB approval for any social media advertising before you do a call out for it. And what that also leads us to a little bit later is HIPAA. So what else can you do to kind of add some zazz to your post? Visuals. At Baylor, we have a lot of people asking for visual abstracts once they get a poster printed for a conference, so they can then share the same information on their social media. Photos, video, our research-based blog publication from the labs has a great post they do once a month called From Image of the Month. And that could be something as simple as a photo of someone's research. We've had GIFs, we've had videos. So it's interesting, right? Because it's still talking about important research, but it's adding this element to it that kind of makes it more engaging visually to people who may be scrolling on social media. I also think there is a time and place for GIFs. We used multiple ones when we were up for a Stat Madness bracket. We were in the final 4, and we did a Twitter chat with Stat Madness and our competitor. And it was great because we were able to kind of add some fun to it by incorporating different GIFs that were related to our heavy science tweets, but then kind of helped make it a little bit more patient friendly or like public friendly with the GIFs. Another great thing that I recommend for people is Canva. If you are not a big Photoshop connoisseur or talent, Canva is great. It's a free photo editing and visual maker. They have all sorts of things from social media posts, perfect sized. They have flyers, they have t-shirts, I believe now. So really the possibilities are endless. So you don't have to have that Photoshop background to kind of make the very labor intensive images. There's also great free features in things like Twitter, the polls. Kind of like I said earlier, it'll be interesting to see what Elon Musk adds to the future, I guess, of Twitter. But polls are great. It's a great way to kind of get your audience to engage with your content, which leads us into hashtags and mentions. So a great way to work with other people, to incorporate other people in your posts are these two very small, when you think about it, features. So hashtags, I like to think of them as keywords. If you wanted somebody to go into Google and type in keywords to find your tweet, that's what your hashtag should be. You can use a hashtag website like Hashtagify, hashtag.org, because what we've had is somebody who comes to me and say, hey, I have this great hashtag, what do you think, for either their research or a student program or something like that. And then we go onto these websites and we find it's shorthand for different things, like technically BCM. If you do hashtag BCM, it is also a gun manufacturing company. So we do not use just hashtag BCM anywhere, because we would then get looped in with this company that makes guns and bump stocks. So just be aware before you make up a hashtag to see what it's related to. Also, mentions, I think they're a great way, like I said, to incorporate people, whether it's collaborators, whether it's friends at other institutions, things like that. But there is, I think, a line that people can go too far. Maybe if you think what you're doing, is very important, or maybe like a celebrity recently, got involved in your interest or something like that. I think there is a time and place for tagging people, but I do think there is a line where it can become spammy. So just be aware, maybe limiting your mentions of people. Now, obviously, if you worked on something and there were 5 people and it makes sense, that's fine. But if you're just tagging people to get more people to see your posts, that's when it can get a little spammy. And if somebody has questions about that later, we can go into it a little bit more. So what can you do to, increase followers and keep them engaged? One thing is post to your account regularly. I am of the firm belief that the more you post, that actually adds more to the algorithm. And so you're more likely to have your posts show up. Now, this isn't something where you have to be tweeting everything you're doing at every second. I say start small. So say that you're going to post once a week, and you're going to put time in your calendar, and that's how you're going to start. And let's say you do that for a month, you move it to 2, you move it to 3, and you kind of get into the groove of building that post. Also, engaging with your followers. Again, setting some time aside in your schedule to go through and like different things, retweet, reply, and you can just say something as simple as, hey, this is great. Thanks for the information. Loved learning more. It doesn't have to be a whole novel. It doesn't have to be a long tweet. It's just something that kind of shows that A, you're seeing what people are doing and you're acknowledging it. And 2, that it kind of, builds that, helps build that you are an expert in the field and you are engaging with other experts in the field. I do recommend, if you see something that you want to retweet or reply to, maybe somebody else that you follow retweeted, just check out that original person's profile, check out a couple days, weeks of their tweets, just to make sure you align, especially with things changing a little bit on the platform. You don't want to accidentally retweet something and then come to find out that you don't agree with who they are, what they stand for, or something like that. So some tips and tricks to keep in mind. I don't feel like I need to say this, but I always do. Be appropriate. My rule of thumb is that anything can become a photo these days. So even if you say something out of anger or hurt, somebody could take a screenshot of it, even if you've deleted it, and it could live elsewhere. So just be aware. if you're upset about something or have somebody responded to you, maybe take a step back, go for a walk, get away, put the phone down, get off social media. Do not go off, because I can tell you right now, it'll get sent to me or somebody at your institution that handles social media, because I've seen it all at about this point. Again, comply with fair use and copyright. I'm a big believer of some copyright-free websites like Pixels and Pixabay. If you are looking for social media images just to kind of jazz up, those are two great options. I think a lot of people think that you can just kind of go into Google and type in dog and pull the photo you find on Google of a dog that you like, that you think is cute. But that image could be copyrighted, and then you and your institution could then be responsible for paying up to, I think the last copyright violation one of our departments had, we had to pay over 1.5 million or something like that for a copyright violation on a website. So just be aware, be aware, be aware, be aware. HIPAA, like I said, we kind of will talk about, never disclose patient information, even if you do something that you think you've fully de-identified the patient. If it is something that they or their family member, friend can look at and know that it's them, you've broken HIPAA. So what we like to say is, if you were like, well, I just posted that I did my first ever surgery of this kind with this instrument on Tuesday. Well, if you know that your dad went in for that surgery on Tuesday at that time, you've broken HIPAA. So just be aware. And I also recommend, if you have any questions about that before you post about patients, reaching out to your institution's social media manager. That's why we're here. That's why we're here to help. So don't hesitate to reach out. Also, this includes if somebody is in a study, so you can either confirm or deny, kind of like a patient, that they are in your study. Again, exercise caution when sharing photos of research models. We recommend that we just take a look before anybody shares anything to make sure nothing that's not published yet is accidentally leaked or anything like that. And this can even be something as simple as, we had a group have a holiday party in their lab, and they didn't realize some stuff was on the whiteboard behind them, and they were taking a cute photo of them all in their funny holiday sweaters, but they had all this stuff on the up corner of a whiteboard, and we had to take the photo down because or we had them take the photo down because they had accidentally leaked some research models that hadn't been published yet. So be aware of your surroundings. I get this a lot, and Dr. Weatherhead will talk about this too in a little bit. What happens when great discussions turn ugly, especially with time we live in, especially kind of seeing what's happening on social media? A lot of people, you post something and a lot of people either take it the wrong way or they highly disagree, and they make your life very stressful. So here are some tips I have that if this happens to you. First, I always recommend ignore. Usually people will kind of bombard you a lot at the beginning and slowly taper off. The majority of the time, not all the time, but that does happen. If for some reason things escalate, you decide to respond, here's what I recommend doing. One, don't come off as defensive. Apologize and explain yourself. And what I mean by apologize, say, this is where I'm coming from. I'm sorry, we don't agree. Excuse me. And then move on about your day. Don't dwell on it. Don't try to respond to everything, because what they're wanting to do is to get a rise out of you, to make you react. And when you react, they get what they want. So if you just ignore it, they'll move on. And also, the ex-Surgeon General posted this a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was really interesting because he's right. And this is what I tell people. But if you don't like somebody's tweet, when you respond to them and you engage with them, so the people that are responding ugly to you, it then feeds your personal rankings in the algorithm. And so what you're doing, because you don't agree with it, you're trying to get them to take it down. It actually does the opposite. So remember that when somebody is ugly to you, but also if you want to respond to all of the comments, if you want to engage with all of the negative comments, remember then you're just feeding them. So it's kind of like that snake eating its tail kind of situation. So just try to ignore it. Try to say, oh, this is cool. They're amplifying my influence, even though I've done nothing wrong. and just kind of move on about your day. So this is my contact information. This is also a shameless plug for following Baylor on social media. We're really fun. We're now on TikTok. So check us out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Weatherhead.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm going to just give a few slides of how I use Twitter specifically to build my early career. So I'm at the stage of everybody else here. I'm, part of the group as well. And I really got into using social media right before COVID hit, actually. My mentor is Peter Hotez, who is very active in social media and engagement with the media, and he had encouraged me to get involved. And so I had just kind of started getting my feet wet when the pandemic started and really took off from there. Just in general, there are a lot of different social media platforms and people use them for different reasons. So for example, for me personally, I use Twitter professionally, and it's really only about me and my branding. I use Facebook for my family and sharing information about my kids and their activities. And I use LinkedIn also as a means of understanding what's going on in my own niche professionally. But people will use different types of social media in different ways. And so it's really about you and what works best for you. People, again, will use Twitter for their families and for professionalism together. And it just really depends on what your goals are with the social media platforms. But having a clear understanding of that beforehand is important so that you can kind of separate things out as you want. So I'm going to walk you through 5 ways that I use Twitter. So I mostly use Twitter professionally, and these are the main reasons how I use it and why I use it. The first one is for education. So this is the biggest one by far that I use Twitter for, and specifically in the form of what are called tweetorials. So I am a parasitologist. I study parasites. And so there's not a lot of us out there. And, as ID docs yourselves, if I were to ask you about some of these topics, many people don't know. And so my goal is to get information about parasites out, mainly to med Twitter, so physicians and healthcare workers that may be taking care of patients, and specifically to ID doctors that need to know this information and may not get a lot of education on parasites in their training. So, for example, I have clinic on Fridays. I have a tropical medicine clinic that sees patients with parasitic infections. And so every Friday, I tweet Trop Med Friday. That is what I do. And something about what I talked about with our fellows or residents that were in there. So some examples of how I've done this: on September 23rd was a Trop Med Friday, and I had several fellows in clinic, and we had a patient with a migratory skin nodule. So we came up with a diagnosis, a differential diagnosis of what parasites cause skin nodules that are either fixed or migratory. And so this was what we discussed in clinic. No patient information here presented, but it got us into a discussion. And in this particular mode, what I did was try to engage my followers. So what did I miss? What should we change? Who else out there has some ideas about this? And we got some nice discussion about what I should change on this and what was good. And then after I made the adjustments, I reposted a new figure. And then more recently, on October 28th, again, I had several fellows. I always tag them so that they can be involved in the conversation as well. We talked about causes of eosinophilic meningitis and how these organisms cause eosinophilic meningitis. And in this particular case, I then went on to do a small tutorial about the big 3 causes of parasitic eosinophilic meningitis: Angiostrongylus, Bacillus ascariasis, and Gnathostomiasis. So I add in some teaching as part of that as well. Sometimes if I have more time, so those ones were kind of brief. It took me 5 minutes. That's the only time I had. This particular Friday, October 14th, I had a little bit more time. A few patients didn't show up. And we were talking about a case of Leishmania recividens. And so I took a little bit more time and walked through different papers and different data that was out there about what this disease state is, because it's not well known, how it's different from other forms of leishmaniasis, and then how would you approach treatment. And in this one, I had recently written a paper on how I treat leishmaniasis in children, so I plugged that in as well as part of the conversation. So it's both discussing types of cases without mentioning specific patients, and then tying in my own published work as well. And then lastly, I sometimes like to do more like quizzes. So Anna had mentioned that there are polls that you can do, and a lot of people like to use those. I'm too lazy to do that, so I'll just throw out a question. So this was a patient we had seen back in May, where I provided Reese's peanut butter cups to them so that it would increase their absorption of the medication. I let people discuss it and then posted, well, this was for a patient that needed to take miltefosine for leishmaniasis, and why you need fatty foods tied in with that drug. So again, a lot of education pieces displayed in different ways. So either in discussions and full tutorials and questions, or in discussions back and forth with followers. The next biggest reason that I use it is for networking. And this has been surprisingly important. In my early career, I didn't think it would be, but it really has been a great way to develop myself as a physician scientist and to expand my collaborations. So I use it for finding mentors for global inclusivity. So I have found people to work with from other regions that I may not have had contact with. And this overall can improve both your research and your patient care. So I included a couple of examples of how I tried to network through my tweets. So the first one up there on October 24th, I had just been a part of ID Week, right? So I think many of us had gone to ID Week. Well, if you look at the schedule, there was not a single topic on PEDS ID parasitology, right? Because I'm sure nobody here really wanted to hear about that either, but I did, and there was nothing in ID Week for that. And so I said, well, maybe I need to develop a network of people who are doing PEDS ID and who are parasitologists. So I reached out to people I knew who were PEDS ID and parasitologists, and then larger accounts that include parasitologists to try and build this network. And now we have several PEDS ID folks that we have on an email listserv where we talk about cases. We're submitting several symposiums to ID Week for next year. And it allows us to bring a small group together to really build a community, which has been really fun. And then the second part is I do a lot of education. So I was looking for lecturers for tropical ophthalmology and tropical neurology, because we don't have anybody with that expertise here at Baylor. And I found someone from Brazil and someone from Boston University who ended up giving lectures for our diploma course here at the National School of Tropical Medicine. So we really expanded our outreach, and we had people with different expertise able to come in and give lectures. And this is another example of someone that I met through Twitter, who's now a good friend and collaborator, Dr. Hickey, who's at the Uniform Services, and he's PEDS ID as well, who specializes in Trop Med. And just through meeting him on Twitter, and finding what he does very interesting. So he takes care of, as part of the US Army, he takes care of children in high-risk locations. I was able to invite him to give lectures for our Summer Institute course as well as for our diploma course. So just using this platform alone, have been able to meet several people within my field and connect together to enhance the information. The third way I use Twitter is through data sharing, and this can come in a few forms. First, Twitter is fast and there is wide distribution, and so you can use that to distribute your own research or research that you think is important in your field. And one area that I really like to highlight is trainee research. So that's a big area that I will always tweet about. It also allows you to stay up to date on new published articles. So, New England Journal of Medicine, Science, Nature, every journal has a Twitter account, and they're constantly publishing up-to-date articles. So This was super important, at least for me at the beginning and during the first year or so of the pandemic, because you were getting constant updates on new articles that were coming out before they hit the media, before they were disseminated within academic centers. And so that the information was flying around Twitter before it really even came out in the mainstream. And so it's a great way to get new information very quickly. And it's a good way to promote your own successes with your own publications. So every time that I or my team or trainees that I know publish anything, I tweet about it. And I tweet about it again in sort of a tutorial kind of fashion where I discuss the importance of the article or why we did it. So these are two examples. The first one is an article I recently published, and then I discussed why this was important in several tweets following this. And then the bottom one being a publication from one of our trainees and celebrating their success and how much work they did. In addition to article promotion, like I said, I'd love to really highlight the trainees in our group. So I'm both in adult ID and peds ID. And so this gives them that first step in terms of recognition and developing their own niche. So whenever I see them in the lab, or I see that they've published something, or they're doing something cool that they're excited about, I try and retweet myself or retweet about them so that they get some spotlight as well. And it's also a great tool to promote activities or opportunities for either yourself or for trainees. So these are two trainee-led experiences through IDSA that I retweeted for both our adult ID trainees as well as for our peds ID trainees. But this is the same for early investigators too. Like there's always new research, grant funding opportunities or advocacy opportunities. And if you're tagging and retweeting, you get those announcements out faster to people who could really benefit from them. The fourth way I use Twitter is through program development. So as I mentioned, I do a lot of education through our National School of Tropical Medicine. I run our diploma course as well as our adult and PD ID fellowship tracks. And so using Twitter as a mode of advertisement has been really helpful. So in terms of our diploma course, our enrollment outside of Baylor has increased significantly since we started advertising for the program on Twitter. So we're getting students from all around the world now that are participating in our diploma course, whereas a few years ago, it was almost exclusively Baylor students and trainees. And our fellowship programs are new. The fellowship program tracks are new. And so we are looking to see if the advertising we've been doing on Twitter has helped with enrollment in our ID programs, training programs, and specifically on these tracks. But I don't have any data on that yet, since these are both new within the last year. And the last piece is about personal branding. And I think this is the hardest for a lot of us. It certainly was for me. To be able to talk about myself and to put my successes out there is very, very difficult. I've gotten better at it over the years and really embraced that I've worked hard for these things, and that letting people know what I've been doing and really building my niche is important, especially for us as junior investigators, junior faculty who are trying to really build what we want to make our careers out to be. And so I use this as an opportunity to advertise my skills, to display achievements, so that people know that, one, I'm doing this and that I am an expert in this area. So ASTMH, our TropMed conference, was last week. I gave several talks. And so every time I had a talk, I promoted this scientific session and then put a little line in about what I would be presenting about. As I mentioned, I do share my successes. Again, it's very uncomfortable to do this for me still, although it's getting a little bit easier, but showing areas where I have been excelling or things that I have been selected for, again, builds me as the expert in parasitology. I'm building my niche and solidifying that I'm the expert in the area by demonstrating selection of in certain awards or in certain committees that I'm a part of. I do also do a lot of media engagement through Baylor College of Medicine. And so I do at times, not all the time, but will retweet media that I've been involved in if I think it's going to be beneficial, if I think it's going to, impact people or people need information. So when there was an outbreak of Burkholderia pseudomallei, and I had several interviews on that, I thought that was an opportunity that people could get educated on what melioidosis was. And then anything about parasites, because most people don't know a ton about parasites, I usually will retweet those media engagements as well. Okay, so one thing that I struggle with a lot is how much personal information I should put into these tweets, because this is mostly for me about my profession and building my niche. So my rule of thumb, at least for me, is that anything that I have in my bio, I will post on. So I love to travel. I'm an adventurer. I'm also, for those on the call that know me, a sports enthusiast, and I am a huge supporter of the academic centers that I attended during medical school and college and all those things. So I will post on things like that. So I love Michigan State sports. Like I said, I'm an adventure seeker, so I'll do crazy things and I'll post about that, like going scuba diving in 34-degree weather or water, running next to volcanoes, those types of things. I will occasionally post about family, but not anything about my kids. That's my own personal rule. Other people will have different opinions on that. But again, very rarely even about my family. It's mostly just about me and anything unique that I like to do or that I'm interested in. All right, so reasons to use Twitter other than how I use it. So a lot of people will use it for advocacy if they have a particular medical topic that they're involved in. So vaccine hesitancy would be a great one that people really do a lot of advocacy on Twitter. Some people do patient consultation. This is a little bit tricky in my opinion because of what Anna was talking about with HIPAA violations and even, showing a picture. If, some people might be able to recognize that that was their rash, right? So you just have to be really cautious about that. I have used it though in reaching out to experts. So there is a person that is a fungal expert. So I have gotten because I knew him, I met him through Twitter. I got his email and set up a call to discuss a patient. So that's more how I use the consultation. And some less focused or less professional based things like crowdsourcing. So, what it's the best scrubs to wear in the hospital, and you get a lot of responses that way. Personal humanizing stories about their own healthcare or their struggles that they've had. And then I don't think this is going to work, but a lot of comic relief. So if you follow Dr. Glaucon-Flecken, it is. So this is an example of some comic relief. I don't know if you can hear it. For those of you who, if you can't, you should watch this. It's all over YouTube. It's hilarious for ID doctors. It's about our difficulties really going out anywhere without thinking about infectious diseases. So I highly recommend listening to it. That he nails us pretty well about what we're like to be around. So I laughed about this forever. Sometimes I go back just to laugh. But this makes it fun and engaging and still has some relevance back to medicine. Okay, so benefits: you establish your professional niche, you can stay up to date on your niche field, you expand your knowledge outside of your niche, and you build a community of people within your interest. So this post is an example of just the interconnectedness. So I did, for those of you who have listened to the Febrile podcast with Sarah Dong from Harvard, I did a podcast with her on eosinophilia. Dr. Boganowitz, who's previously from Texas Children, did a lecture on eosinophilia. He included that podcast in it. This Jessica talked about it and included the Febrile podcast in her tweet. Febrile retweeted that, and then I retweeted it. And it was just all of us connected talking about eosinophilia. So it brought a lot of people together, and people I would have never met or known about or had a discussion with. So it's a really cool way to increase networking, especially about topics that you're interested in. Okay, so I don't want you to think I have rose-colored glasses about social media. It has also been a major thorn in my side, and I have a very conservative approach to Twitter because of some things that I've gone through in the past that I will share that are still a little bit challenging for me to talk about. But this was a post that I put out on October 25th of 2021. For those who don't know me, I have a spouse who had cancer and was on immunosuppression throughout the pandemic, and 2 small children who were in schools, and I had a lot of fear related to my husband getting sick. And so my 4-year-old got enrolled in the Pfizer vaccine trial here at Texas Children's, and this was his first dose, and I was so excited and felt this huge sense of relief, so I posted about it. Again, I still don't really post my kids' faces, obviously, but this is the last post I've ever mentioned my children, I will tell you that. Unfortunately, it went viral for the wrong reasons. It happened to be the same day that the Children's Health Defense, the notorious anti-vax group, was having a Twitter storm, and they happened to get a hold of this tweet, and it went viral to the point where I was getting death threats and harassing calls, and obviously cyberbullying. I had to have security involved. Poor Anna had to bail me out mentally quite a bit.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, so Anna was heavily involved, as was, the president of the college, and it was a very, very distressing time. I had to stay out of work for a few days because of the threats and the calls and everything. So it was really a horrific experience, honestly, and I've made some adjustments to how I use Twitter since then, but it's important to understand that even though we use it for our networking, it is not a protected space. So people are going to see these tweets, no matter how small you try and curate your followers. It's often dehumanized, so people don't recognize that, I'm a real person tweeting about my real child and a very sensitive topic. And so the attacks were pretty harsh and distressing. And, there's minimal regulation that's continuing to change now. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of bullying, and it's very, very distressing. This is also a permanent record, as Anna mentioned. So even if I never took this tweet down, I left it up. I did prevent people from replying once it got completely out of control, but it's still there because people took screenshots. So people were screenshotting it and retweeting it. So you can see at the bottom, it was retweeted 3,681 times. So it was pretty out there, and most of those were with comments about what a horrible parent I am, and CPS should be involved. And the other piece is, these are short blurbs, so there is a restriction on how much words you can put in each tweet. And because of that, you can get varying interpretations of your tweet. And you have to be really conscious of how the words that you're choosing to put in that tweet, because it can be interpreted differently by different people. So from this experience, at least for me, I'm very, like I said, I'm very conservative about what I tweet now. It's really stuck in my niche. It's mostly professional. I do check anybody who follows me. And like I said, I'm a little bit over the top, so because I'm still a little skittish about this, I do check anybody who follows me, and I remove them if there's any sort of bullying on their profile, or if they're bots or anything like that. So I've curated as much as I can to be a protective space for me, so that I can keep using it to develop my professional niche while protecting myself as much as I can. And with that, we left a few minutes for some conversation and for some questions. And if anything comes up, or if you ever have questions about it, I'm happy to answer questions or talk or set up a phone call. And my email's here as well. But I'll be seeing you guys every month anyway, so let me know.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you, Anna. That was really, 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 really helpful, very practical. Great. So, questions?
Yeah, Jill, I thank you so much, and Anna, for that talk. I thought it was really great. So Jill, I had a question, like, just with understanding what happened with your child, like I'm not on social media, and I think I saw someone in the chat, there's just some, I guess, fear and anxiety about it, but with like vaccination and talking about vaccines, do you think it was specifically like your role as a parent, or like that anti-vaxxers, you know, if you were posting other things about vaccines or vaccine research, that may have taken off as well?
So I had been posting about vaccines for a year and a half before this. So, and I had no issues. You know, if you take my boss, Peter Hotez, who tweets about vaccines all day long, he gets a lot of pushback, but he has very thick skin, and that's what he does, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I had never gotten pushback. I even did a full live tutorial of me getting vaccinated, like videos and showing myself going and all this stuff. So I never had an issue. I think this was really bad timing. And there's a lot of sensitivity around COVID vaccines in children, as many of you guys know, being on the front lines of this research. And it happened to be around the time, like the next week is when it was getting approved, Pfizer was getting approved. So it was just horrible, horrible timing. I had a colleague who posted the exact same thing on the same day and no issue at all. It was just bad luck on my part. But I think vaccines in general there's not enough emotion there's not as much emotion about it as these COVID vaccines in children. If it's a hot topic at the time, so let's say it's, you know, revolving around MMR, for example, and it's an ongoing public discussion, then yes, I think you'll probably get some pushback. But if it's about vaccines in general, I don't think you would.
Thank you. Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, how did you embark upon your decision to start using Twitter for science? What were you doing this as a fellow as well? Like, what led you to take on this role?
Yeah, I started, so I'm in my 4th year of faculty right now. So I started right about the time I was finishing fellowship. Again, it was kind of a push from Peter, my mentor, to get involved and showing, you know, trying to develop a voice for scientists, because we're often silenced by a loud, minor but loud group of anti-science persons. And so, you know, it's not in my character to put myself out there at all. And I just felt like it was a calling for me that, hey, if I'm going to be doing this work, I really need to get out there and have a voice to counter a lot of the misinformation that was out there already. And then when COVID hit, it was just an explosion of need at that time. And slowly I've tapered off of the COVID stuff. At this point, I wouldn't post anything about COVID because it's not really my niche. And it really, over the time, focused it down to what my research is, what I'm an expert in, to build that profile. But yeah, it started early just as motivation to be a scientific voice in a climate that was being dominated by a minority of very loud voices.
So I have a question for Anna and Jill together. Jill, I noticed you used a lot of pictures during in some of your tweets, and I know, Anna, you commented about copyrighted pictures. How do you determine a picture on web, online? How do you determine that picture is copyrighted? You could use it, or you can't use it?
Great question. So if you're looking for more general photos, there's websites that are copyright-free images. One that we use at Baylor a ton is called Pexels, Pexels. IDCRS.com. I'll put it in the chat. And it's a great free resource, but I know, Dr. Weather had some stuff from journals. A lot of them, when you share a link, it'll bring up like a little preview and it'll include an image, or they'll let you know, you can take a screenshot and link to the journal article. So that's a couple ways if you have a specific article in mind that you want to use, but those would be your best bet. I also know that NIH, NHI, what am I saying? NIH has like a free library of photos that you can use. And that's a great place too.
Yeah, I usually will use journal articles and I post the article there too.
Mm-hmm.
So if I take a picture of an image, so like that leishmaniasis map, I make sure to put in the article there so people can reference back to it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, this is Satoshi from Emory. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's a great talk, and Jill. So I use kind of Twitters to advocate vaccines, and actually it's not in the United States. It's mainly for Japan, where I was originally from, and then I tweet in Japanese. And then, there are a lot of skepticism about the COVID vaccines initially, because that's, the vaccine that was made outside of Japan. So, I thought I really, because I'm here in the United States, involved in the BTU trials. So I thought, I should, try to kind of educate lay people about vaccines. But I got a lot of anti-vax, response every time I tweet, and then, as Jill had, horrible experience, I was told that I was evil, and it's so, unethical to, use children for the experimental vaccines and stuff like that. But I was really down, I got these messages. So, it took time to get recovered, but, now I kind of try to mute whoever from the anti-vax people, or I even restrict the comment box only for person who follow me, who I follow actually, and then kind of try to focus on sending the information, and then I don't get any comments. But at the same time, it's hard to read these, harsh, comments. So I wonder, Jill had a really horrible experience, and Anna tried to help. I wonder, what kind of type of advice or supports that Anna gave. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think I think I called you, and I think I just said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. I'm so sorry. I think that's the first thing I said when you answered the phone. But really kind of like what I said in my thing, I think our first step was to start going through and reporting them, right? So I was like, we need to report them because basically what they're saying is technically considered abuse based on Twitter's user policy. When you sign up, you sign a term of agreements, right? A term of conditions, terms and conditions that you will not bully, harass, things like that. So that was kind of our first step, was we started going through, and I think it was you, right, Jill? It was you, me, and then a couple of different people on our media team. We just all started going through on our different Twitters and reporting as much as we could.
I think it was mainly you guys because I couldn't do it.
Yeah. So we started doing that, and then, you took a break. So Twitter is interesting in the fact that if you delete your account, you have 28 days before it's officially deleted. So that was kind of the next step, is that you just deactivated your account for the time, I think a couple of weeks, and then were able to go in and re-undo it.
Yeah, and I would say what Anna had mentioned, and she told me this, she was like, it's going to be bad for a few days, and then they're going to forget about it and they're going to move on to somebody else. And that's what happened. I mean, it was bad for about 48 hours, and then it trickled down, and, I was still traumatized, and so I stayed off, but, by the time I came back on, nobody remembered me. Nobody cares.
And moved on to the next. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do want to comment on one thing, because a lot of you are vaccine researchers, I don't want you to be afraid to use the platform for your research. I think the advocacy piece is probably where you can get, like Satoshi had mentioned, you know, that was within advocacy, where you just have to know that you're going to get that pushback, but your own research and formulating your own niche and your own professional page, you're not going to get that kind of pushback.
Okay. So yeah, a couple of questions on the chat. Thank you. Tio, do you want to ask your question for?
Sure. I was just curious. A lot of people on Twitter floated a new social media platform that you guys have heard of called Mastodon. What are your thoughts? Or do you think there's enough momentum to switch? Should people switch? Just curious what you guys thought of that.
So that's a tricky question, right? So I'm getting this question all the time since when did the official buy-in go through? Like 2 Fridays ago now. So what I've been telling our faculty is, and students and departments across the board, our president, is we're kind of in a wait and see period, right? To see what Elon Musk actually does and doesn't do. I think if you want to go ahead and get a Mastodon account, I think that's great. I still don't know, to just be honest with everybody here, I still don't know a ton about it. I know that it's like, you know, I can't think of the word, but it's basically anybody can take the code that Mastodon uses and create their own social media network, website, things like that. So the coding is available to anybody, which is interesting to me because it keeps things right, that anybody can use it, but that also makes me nervous because that means anybody can use it and tweak it and do stuff with it. So I don't know. I wouldn't abandon ship quite yet. If you know a lot of colleagues on Mastodon, they suggest different servers for you to join, I say go for it. But I wouldn't abandon ship quite yet on Twitter. I will be interested to see kind of what happens. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Weatherhead, and thank you so much, Anna. This has been very helpful to many of us. Great lecture. It's on top of the hour, and thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.